products we're designing are constantly iterating, we think that the tools that we're working with should also be iterating. Especially everything we have at our disposal, just kind of like the last talk, it's not easy, but it's simpler to make a product nowadays. But we still want to kind of work in that handoff process from designer to developer, which is really interesting, and it's got a lot of room for opportunities. So I've been at Lightwell, and Lightwell is basically a designer to developer handoff tool that allows designers to make high fidelity prototypes that a developer can implement with a few lines of code. So for the past 6 months, we've been kind of like in this discovery phase, talking to a lot of designers, and all the designers that we're talking to are in different kind of companies. So we have small companies, medium companies, and large companies. And what we notice is that there's definitely like a repeated pattern in between all these companies. That there's like common challenges that people are experiencing, and they can kind of be broken down into these 3 steps. Not steps, but 3 different categories. So first of all, there's like a huge miscommunication between designers and developers, and kind of like the way that our job gets measured or evaluated or whatever is through that kind of communication. It's like if you're a designer who's designing things that you have no idea how they're going to be implemented, then obviously that's not stepping in the right direction. So there's like this huge miscommunication between designers and developers, and there's tons of different tools right now that are trying to solve for that. Another big area, like a problem that we found, was that there's a lot of designs that get lost in transition. So I don't know if this has ever happened to you guys, but you ever design something and then you hand it off, and all of a sudden like it doesn't look exactly the way you did it, just because of time, or maybe because of out of scope or whatever. So which kind of like segues into the next problem, time. Sometimes we want to make something that's really cool and we just don't have the bandwidth, or it's just it's out of scope. So these are kind of some of the issues that we noticed that a lot of different people and a lot of different size teams are having. So we're kind of trying to see how we can turn these problems into opportunities and use everything in our disposal to kind of like make the process more seamless. So how can we improve this process? And basically, it's about, I don't know if any of you guys drive stick shift when we're in New York, but it's like a car. Whenever we're designing something and we're in Sketch, we're in like this visual thinking mode, because you have to come up with a lot of different iterations. What if this button looked this way? What if it's an outline? What if the font's this way? And that's kind of like some of the design details that we like to focus on, because ultimately the devil is in the details. So going from this like abstract thinking of like trying to visually communicate data, like basically data. That's kind of like our job, is data visualization. So how can we shift that mindset to think almost like developers, which is more system thinking, kind of like the way computers work. So we don't want to just be thinking abstract and visually all the time. At some point we need to shift the gears and go into this systematic thinking, because again, the products we're designing for, it's not a free-for-all. Like, although in Sketch it's a free-form tool and you can make anything that you want, ultimately that's not the way that things are being built. So as product designers, we need to be able to understand this and kind of like shift mindsets. So this is kind of like how your visual thinking goes. When you're working in Sketch, you're just like iterating. Let me try this, let me try that, maybe this looks good, maybe this doesn't look good. And all of a sudden, I mean, that's kind of like how our mind works. We're in this like mode of just coming up with as many ideas as we possibly can. But ultimately, when it gets transferred down, the developer is only going to write 1 or 2 lines. So this is kind of like the difference between system thinking and visual thinking. So how can we make that like handoff process smoother and easier for everybody to understand, and to kind of just make the process smoother. So one of the things that we're noticing now is that we need to like forget about this concept of static artboards. When we're designing in Sketch or something like that, we're constantly like making states for everything, for every possible case that a user might have, you know? So this ultimately isn't, again, the way that things are being built. Things are being built dynamically. When a developer takes your sketch file, they're not going to implement 4 different screens for 2, 3 different button states. But as a designer, that's kind of the way we think, or that we've been thinking. So we need to kind of evolutionize the artboard and kind of start thinking more dynamically when it comes to our screens. So there's been a lot of talk about should designers code, should they not code? And also there's like this concept of UX and UI, and UX is not UI, and yada yada yada. And I think at this point there's been so much talk about separating the two that it's almost like people forgot about the UI, and they're not really evolutionizing the UI. They're just kind of thinking about the whole mythologies and stuff like that. But it's like, okay, how do we break this down so we can understand it a little better? So what I like to say to people is, if we think of UX, it's kind of like the brain. It's kind of like how our brain works, right? And if we think of UI, it's kind of like what we wear. But the screens that we're designing, again, are not static. And the way that we interact with people is not mechanical, you know? So how do we add more like style to our screens, more flair? Because right now, everything that we're doing to do that is getting de-scoped. So that's kind of like where some of the problems that we're trying to solve. We're trying to give more life, more personality to your interfaces. And we're doing this by making high fidelity, production ready prototypes. So right now, whenever we hand something off, after we design everything and we hand over our files, everything has to be rebuilt. It's like a waste of time for both of us, both the designers and developers, because ultimately it's a flawed system. We're having to redo everything. And although the prototyping tools that we're using now have gotten us so far, and it's pretty crazy some of the things that we can do, we're just trying to see ahead on what's the next step, you know? And we ultimately don't think that things should be rebuilt. A developer should take your prototype and build on top of it, add the business logic, not just rebuild your layouts, rebuild the animations. So those are some of the problems that we're trying to solve right now. Basically, having production-ready prototypes that a developer would really like to work on, because again, it's not starting everything from scratch. And ultimately, this is saving so much time for businesses, for the customer, and it's going to allow us to build more products with way more personality, which is kind of like what we want to do. We don't want to just have, things are starting to look alike. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but a lot of products, a lot of tools are starting to come up with design systems, and everyone's got their own design system now, but then things start looking the same, and it's kind of where we want to come in and just give a little bit more personality to these products. So the third step will be to just continue to do this all over again. And for the sake of time, that's all I have for today. But we're gonna start a meetup with half my team here. But we're trying to basically learn more from product designers, just to see how we can improve your process. Because again, we don't just want to build things the way that we think, kind of like the last talk, you know, we want to talk to more product designers. And we just can't forget about the fact that, yes, the products that we're designing are constantly being iterated, but so should the tools that we're working with. And yes, that's it.
Meetup page.
I will
link
for
it
sure.
back so everyone here, we're all gonna go to that meetup, right?
Okay, that'll be our first one, so.
anyone have any questions?
Sorry.
Where's the meetup at?
In our office.
Our office in Midtown, so right on 58th and 6th.
Yeah,
Cool.
there you go. So I'll post a link somewhere and then we'll go from there.
Awesome.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.